The single biggest bottleneck for most authors is time. We have the ideas, we have the outlines, but turning that into a polished book is a marathon that can take years. What if I told you you could turn that marathon into a 4-day sprint? Hi guys, my name is Jason. I'm the nerdy novelist. I used to work for Kindlepreneur, one of the largest author training websites, which taught me a whole lot of things about the author process. And now I teach authors how to write with AI in order to get their ideas onto the page, using it as a productivity tool without compromising your creativity or your ethics. And I ran an experiment on my own novel, and in this video, I'm going to show you how I used AI to create a genuinely clean, well-written first draft in just a few days, and why I believe this could allow me to publish a new book based on my own ideas every 2 weeks or so. Now, when I say I wrote a novel in 4 days, I need to be completely honest. I did cheat a little bit. The foundation of the book, meaning the detailed outline, was something I had written a long time ago. So I've had that in my back pocket for a while. This wasn't just a throwaway story. This was book 5 in one of my established fantasy series. Actually, this fantasy series right here. This fantasy series is really important to me because this is the fantasy series that I burned out on. I wrote the first 2 books. I was halfway through the third when I released the first 2 books, and it absolutely tanked. And the reason was I had not targeted the genre very well. And the cover that you see and the title that you see here is actually different than what I initially published. But I was expecting a lot from it. I was expecting to make a lot of money from it. And it ended up doing worse than the previous series that I had published, which was my first. And so writing book 5, it's actually the first one I've completed in years. And I used AI to do it. And because it was book 5 in a series, it was very important that it feel like my story and that it sounded like me. So that was a priority for me as I was going into this project. Now, the engine behind this entire operation is an automation that I built in a tool called N8N. Think of it like a digital assembly line. You create a series of steps that take information from one place, process it, and send it somewhere else, all automatically. And for this project, its job was to feed the AI into a variety of different models in different steps, getting everything it needed to write one chapter at a time exactly to my specifications. And for every single chapter it wrote, it was given the detailed scene-by-scene outline, full character sheets for everyone involved, a world-building Bible, and even samples of my writing from my previous 4 books to use as a stylistic guide. It was a massive amount of information, but it was necessary to ensure that Claude and the other models didn't just write a generic fantasy scene, but a scene that belonged in my universe and sounded like it came from me. I want to quickly show you what this automation looks like. It's the kind of thing that looks complicated at first glance, but the logic is pretty simple once you break it down. So this is the automation right here. There are a number of steps here. The first few, you can see these are all just grabbing documents from Google Docs. I use Google Docs for all my automations. I find it's the simplest and easiest. And most people have Google Docs, so they're able to do this. But basically what happens is I just click a button. This one right here, it says execute workflow, and it will run through this process. And I specifically give it my outline, my characters, my world building, sample prose, a style sheet based on that sample prose, a list of forbidden words that I don't want it to be using, and so words that AI uses quite a bit. As well as I bring in the document where I want the finished text to go. So if you're just starting on this project, this document will be one that you create and is blank when you start, but you'll need that. And the way I'm able to call all of these things is if you click on one of these, it has the document ID, which you can just get in the URL of whatever document you're doing. You do also have to connect N8N to your Google Docs account. And this overview is, I'm not going to tell you how to set up N8N. We do have resources for that in my Story Hacker Gold group, and I'll make more videos about N8N and everything. That's not really the purpose of this video. I'm just sort of showing you the workflow. So we pull in all of these documents, and then I use this node. It has a prompt here that says, you are a parser. Given the above book outline text, return a JSON array named chapters containing each chapter title exactly as it appears, 1 element per title, including those without numbers like prologue or epilogue, and make sure the chapter numbers are also present where listed. Do not include any additional keys, only output valid JSON. And sometimes I'll say, actually, I specifically want you to do these specific chapters, not all of the chapters. What that does is it then makes a list of chapters. And from there, they get parsed in this node right here, and we start a loop. So this thing right here goes through each of those chapters that were listed in the previous step that were parsed out. And it creates a loop that then goes chapter by chapter through each of them and writes the whole thing. So in theory, you could give it an outline and let this go, and it would go through your entire book and write the whole thing all at once. I found that took me about 2 hours for it to go through a 40 chapter outline and actually write all 40 chapters. That was expensive. I don't actually recommend doing it all at once like that, but it was, it was for science. So then, if you're writing the first chapter, these 2 steps won't matter, but I like it to be able to read the previous 2,000 words or so. You could also change this to be 3, 4, 5,000 words, however many you want. But I just like it to know basically what happened in the last chapter, so it can continue off of the end of that last chapter in a way that is that makes sense, that is seamless. So we grab the last 2,000 words of the chapter, and then we run through these 4 steps, 4 AI models, different models for each of these, except these last 2 are the same. And once it goes through those 4 steps, it then takes that chapter that it has written and it plops it into your document that you pulled in earlier. So this node is just called add chapter to document. And then it goes to this and replays the loop. But on the next loop, if you started with chapter 1, it will go on to chapter 2 and so on. So it's a very handy loop. You can kind of just press execute and don't worry about it until it's finished the number of chapters you want. But these 4 steps, there's 4 of them. There's the first one is creating a scene brief. So I'll show you a little bit of what that prompt looks like. So we pull in the outline, the characters, the world building, the previous chapter text, and then I have it create a scene brief to sort of spell out what should happen in this specific scene. And who are the characters involved? What are they doing? How are they? What's their mood in this particular chapter? What are they wearing in this particular chapter? Because their physical appearance might be slightly different from one chapter to another. And this is actually useful because I had like a character that got injured in one chapter. And because I was doing this scene brief and it was able to look at the last 2,000 words, it knew that this character was injured. And it was also looking at the outline, so it was able to derive from that the character was injured, and it was able to pass that information on into the next chapter it was writing. Had it not done that, it would have just he would have been injured in the previous chapter, and in the next chapter he would have just been fine. So it's important to be able to let it have that level of awareness of the chapter. So it creates a scene brief to give it all of the details that it needs for that specific scene. And then we move on to the most important step, which is the first draft. By the way, I'm using Sonnet 4.5 for the scene brief right now, but for the first draft, I'm using Opus 4.1. Opus is an expensive model, and I literally throw the entire kitchen sink at it in this particular prompt. So this is an expensive step. It would cost me about 75 cents per chapter for just this step. Everything altogether was costing me about $1 per chapter. But it's worth it to me because I get good prose out of Opus, better than Sonnet 4.5 and any other model that I've tested. So first I give it the style sheet and the style prose examples from my text. I also give it the prohibited words that I don't want it to use. I give it full context, including the entire outline, the characters, and the world building. I give it the previous 2,000 words of text so it knows where to start off from. And I give it the scene brief that was generated in the previous step. I then go through a couple of instructions here on what to do and let it go. And then from there, it writes the first chapter. Now, as we all know, if we've worked with AI a lot, there's all kinds of little AI-isms and little quirks and cliches and things that are a little bit dull about AI writing. And while Opus 4.1 is very good, it's got better scene cohesion and everything that I've seen from any other model, it still has some of those things in it. And so these next 2 steps are meant to polish that out a little bit, just to make it a little bit better for when I then go through it. So it would go through this improvement plan, and then it would go through and using that improvement plan, it does a rewrite. The improvement plan looks something like this. It's I've got a list of things I wanted to look for. So like metaphors, identify any metaphors and instruct them to be removed. Adverbs, identify any over-reliance on adverbs. Dialogue tags, identify dialogue tags that are not said or asked. Make suggestions for which ones should be changed to said or asked. Flag instances of passive voice. So stuff like that. I'm just having it go through and polishing this up just a little bit so that I don't have to do it later. And so it goes through, and this step crucially does not do any rewrites. All it does is it highlights the problems. And then in the next step, I'm also not having it do a rewrite. I ask it to simply implement the suggested changes, but do not change anything else about the original chapter. Reproduce the entire chapter with the suggested changes. I found that if you use the word rewrite, it will rewrite the whole thing, and it's often worse, depending on which model you're using, than the original draft. So instead of asking for a rewrite, I ask it to just implement the changes and not change anything else. So that's all this prompt does. And so it goes through those and it reproduces the chapter at the end with all of those changes made, and then adds that chapter to the document, and then it loops back around and starts on the next chapter. And it continues to do that. So you can do this for the entire book all at once. The reason I don't recommend that is because I found that if it got a little off on one chapter, and there were actually instances where it actually wrote the wrong chapter. I've since corrected that, but that was an issue as I was going through this project. If it does get a little off, like even if it's off by 1 degree, in the next, it might be off by 2 degrees and then 3 degrees. And then it just gets worse and worse as it goes along. And so I find it's good to write, you could go one chapter at a time and do that. That would take a while though, and then you'd have to wait for the generation to happen in between each chapter. So I found the sweet spot for me was 2 to 3 chapters, where I would have it generate all 3 while I'm doing something else, and then I'll go through and revise those chapters. And then after I've revised those chapters, I have it do the next 2 or 3 chapters, and I'll go to do something else. And then I'll come back and revise those chapters. And then that way I was able to get through a bunch of different chapters all at once. Of course, every one of these chapters, especially the ones that I had to regenerate, came with a literal cost. The Claude Opus model is not cheap, and it's the best large language model for creative writing on the market right now, in my opinion, but you pay for that quality. And each chapter cost me on average about $1 to generate, as I mentioned. And so for a 40 chapter book, that's $40. Factoring in the handful of chapters that I had to regenerate due to mistakes, the total cost for the raw first draft was probably closer to 50 or 60. Now, people might balk at that, but let's put it in perspective. Would you pay $60 to have a complete 80,000 word first draft of your novel appear on your computer tomorrow? Like, I have worked with ghostwriters and paid them $4,000 or $5,000 for a good draft. Now, granted, it is a little bit cleaner, and I can expect more from a ghostwriter and have to guide them a little less than I do with AI. But at the same time, $40 versus $4,000 is a big thing for most people. Most people are not going to be hiring ghostwriters, right? You're either going to be writing it yourself or you're going to be using AI to do it. And so for me, $40 is nothing. $40 is absolutely worth a clean first draft. And you're going to get a lot cleaner first draft using Opus than another model. I've tried this with using Sonnet 4.5 for the actual prose generation, and it just isn't the same. It's not as good. It's not bad, but you're going to be paying for it later with more time to clean up those drafts than if you used Opus. At least that's been my experience. By the way, if you'd like to learn more about how to use AI as an author-led productivity tool to write at least 12 books per year, if not more, and without compromising your creativity or ethics, go check out the Story Hacker Gold link down below. You can also get this exact model that I'm using to use on your own and implement into your own books. So with the raw manuscript complete, it was time for the part of the process that most authors dread, and that's the first big edit. But this is also where the title of this video comes from, because the actual writing, the generation of the text only took a few hours of total processing time, spread out over a day or so. And the human part of the work, the editing, only took me 4 days. I had a simple process. This was a 40 chapter book. And so I set a goal of editing roughly 10 chapters a day. That didn't take me that long. It usually took me between 2 and 2.5, maybe 3 hours for some of the more complicated parts where the AI really messed up. But in that amount of time, I was able to get through 10 chapters, and a lot of it was really good. And there are actually quite a few moments that I thought were actually excellent inside of the book. And I can attribute this to Opus, because Opus is the only one that does this sort of thing. For one, I had a moment when two of the characters were having this quiet philosophical debate between the merits of justice versus mercy. And I looked at the text that it gave me, and it was actually a genuinely thoughtful philosophical debate, a lot of which was not provided by me, at least not beat for beat, right? I just said they debate justice and mercy, and this person has this view and this person has that view. But then when they came together, it was actually a genuinely good conversation. There was another moment also when my main character, she has this magical ability to mirror the abilities of others, and she comes into contact with this kind of Lovecraftian entity that's really horrifying, and she tries to mirror its ability, and it does not go well for her, and she starts to transform into this massive ugly things. And it did this layered, really strong showing instead of telling scene where it just described her transformation, and it also layered in like the reactions of other characters around her, because it was from one of their perspectives watching her make this transformation. And there are other characters who don't realize what's going on, and they're just kind of like laughing until they figure out what's going on, and then they like start freaking out. And all of the reactions from each of the characters, because there were villains there and allies there, they were all unique and separate to each other, and not just like the same reaction from each one. And so I got moments like that I was just like flying through it. I was just like, this is amazing. And then there were others where it was not so good, and I had to really tighten it up and spend more time on it. And as I mentioned, there were a couple of times, one of the problems that I noticed is that sometimes it would write the wrong chapter. And that's because in the scene brief step, sometimes it would get the wrong one. And so it would say, okay, we're writing this scene. And in fact, I wanted a scene that was like 3 chapters earlier. That seems to have been solved with a tweak of the prompt. I haven't had a problem with it since. But that was something that happened, and that caused me to have to regenerate huge sections of the novel in order to get it right. And it was through that process that I figured out that going 2 or 3 chapters at a time might actually be better than trying to do huge sections at a time. So the only real downside to that is that you can't like edit 10 chapters at once, because you have to edit a few, then generate more, then edit a few, then generate more. And so you're going back and forth between editing a text, and then you have to go do something else for a while it's generating the next few, because it does take a little while. It's not like something where you're going to be sitting around for just a few minutes and then you get the next chapter. Like it takes for like 3 chapters, it would probably take 15, 20 minutes. I'd say probably for each chapter, it took about 5 minutes to go through all of those steps. That's my rough estimate, maybe more. But yeah, so I don't like to be constantly bouncing between things to try and multitask, because humans actually can't multitask properly. So if I'm going to be editing text, I'd like to just sit down and edit all 10 chapters, but that wasn't really ideal with the way this worked. But regardless, I was still able to get it done in 4 days, 10 chapters a day. Didn't take me that long overall. The only reason I couldn't do more was because I also I film YouTube videos, and I'm doing other marketing things, and I'm administrating in my group, and like all this stuff that I do in addition to this. But this, it was totally doable. And I think anybody, even if you have a full-time job or something like that, you could probably, if you could spare an hour a day, you could get through this in a week or so. And if I were to factor in the cost, the time cost of creating an outline, as well as doing like secondary edits and formatting and publishing, I think this would probably take me about 2 weeks. Now, I have sent this manuscript over to a line editor just to do a second pass on it. If you don't have the budget for a line editor, then you would want to do at least 2 more passes, I think, on it. So that would take extra time. But I already knew just from having read through it that I would probably glaze over a lot of the problems that were left in the manuscript. So I wanted to get a objective third party to come in and do a pass on it. And that's just more for my own peace of mind, that I know that the text is going to be decent. So if this process sounds exciting to you and you want to learn my entire framework for going from a blank page to a finished book in hand, including how to market it, you should check out my school group, Story Hacker Gold, and in there we dive deep into how to use AI and other tools to enhance your process without ever compromising your creativity as an author. The group also includes weekly live calls with me, all of my ebooks and audiobooks for authors, and a community of writers who are all pushing the boundaries of what's possible. So if that's interesting to you, the link is in the description, and I will see you in the next video.